wanted to use really short.
Let me turn to Sister Conrad at this point. Sister Conrad, now you've been on the front lines dealing with the challenges really of a host of social ills. Given your particular experience and studies, will the policies that you heard today proposed by Senator Rubio, will they work on the ground for real families and those caught up in social problems?
Thank you for asking that question. We didn't know what questions we were going to be asked, so it's exciting. Having had the experience a number of years ago of doing a Lyndon B. Johnson Congressional Fellowship in the Reagan administration in the office of a Gypsy Moth Republican, I can very much, which I think probably would be an oxymoron today, I can really appreciate the complexity of the political situation and the complexity of Senator Rubio's remarks and so on. And certainly his patriotic and spiritual motivation for the American dream is extremely helpful. But I think there are a number of reservations that need to be raised as to kind of the common question. These are all wonderful ideas and could be very, very helpful, but how do we pay for them? You know, we have the pay-go policies in Congress at the present time, and what we've seen happening to many of our poor families is that although one program might be developed, it's at the cost of another program, okay? So the notion of kind of robbing Peter to pay Paul has the potential here, and a reservation that I have concerns about. I know that there is interest in a debate about the income tax credit, but one of the things that most of our professionals know when they work directly on the ground with people is that the income tax credit may raise people just slightly above the poverty line, which is a wonderful thing. However, it makes them ineligible for other services that support them. Okay, so again, you know, we need to really look at what sounds good, what are the long-range consequences, what does it mean to the family, and so on. In terms of other social concerns about the family, what are the supports for the family for today? And I certainly want to second my colleagues who have talked about the needs in the community. The recent American Community Survey just pointed out that increasing numbers, large proportions of poor families live in poor neighborhoods, which is the opposite of what Dr. Reeves is talking about. And so there are not the opportunities, they're not the examples. And I think these are some very serious reservations that have to be questioned. And we do have to hope that those in the political field who have the courage to raise these concerns and to raise some solutions also have the courage to challenge those who are of greater wealth to participate, to share, and so on. You know, there are political commentators who are pointing out that instead of living in a democracy today, we're really moving to a plutocracy where the wealthy really make the major decisions. Others say we're in an oligarchy where very few are making the decisions. And this is, you know, our whole democratic system in many ways is eroding along with the American family. At the same time, the American family doesn't have the kinds of opportunities that our parents, our foreparents have had as well.
The senator talked at length about the role of values and his suggestion was that values were were the magic by which we'd be able to address a good number of these ills. And now, Sister, you've dealt with real families facing social crises of all sorts and similar cases. How much of that is in fact, you know, a problem of values, a problem of the breakdown of values? How much can we actually hope that changing people's values is really going to address the problem?
The more serious question is, do we really get at the values? You know, in my field, we're very concerned about looking at where are the strengths. And very often a value that would seem to be important to many of us in another social class is expressed in a different way for another group of people. And so I think that this notion of really getting at, what is it? Senator Rubio gave some examples about families who are not two-parent families and how they survived. What we really have to look at is what were the values there that helped them to survive. Usually there's people in the community that are helpful. Sometimes the man in the grocery store, the school bus driver, provides a sense of value that in many ways the American spirit really has a way of seeking out and finding. And I think as a general public, we have to begin to look with those eyes as well.
Let me ask that same question actually to Penny Nance, put it in a different way. I'm from a small town in Iowa. Grew up in the 1950s. The town was completely Catholic. Everyone shared the same values. Essentially a large farming community was what it was. And so, of course, I grew up in a situation of extremely homogenous, tight, well-respected values. Penny, is that what we want today? Is that going back to something like that the solution in your estimation?
First off, I would say that we've got to characterize some values as better than others, and we shouldn't be afraid to say that. And that is the role often of the church in a community. As we become less religious as a country, we have moved away from in Christian values, which have valued marriage and fidelity and getting married before you get pregnant and staying together. And so when everything is the same, and then when our kids are Kim and Kanye are held up as the ideal, guess what? Guess what they decide to do? And so I would say that. No, we're not going to be completely homogenous, and we shouldn't be. God created us all differently, and it's beautiful. But we do certainly need to be clear about what are better choices than others for our young people. We can't be afraid of that, and we shouldn't walk away from it. As the adults in the room, we need to say it.
I'm curious what Richard Reeves would think about that, since there seems to be a kind of a parallel between his discussion of character and this discussion of values.
I think it's really important we don't confuse values and institutions. Marriage is not a value. Marriage is something that expresses a value, that can cultivate a value, that can... There isn't a marriage value. There are values that lie behind a successful marriage. Right. And for me, the key value is commitment, right? And marriage is an expression of a commitment, and it's a way to stick with that commitment. It's a way to help you get through the, for better, for worse. And I think the senator slightly made that mistake as well. I think he conflated the institution and the value and the lines, and I think that's what leads him in the wrong direction on equal marriage, by the way. So can I just briefly talk?
Of course, yes.
Talk about that, because there's another very strong value here, which is equality, and he talked a lot about equality of opportunity. And Jefferson said we are all created equal. He actually wrote we're all created equal and independent, which I quite like, because that fits with the senator's idea of equality of opportunity. And for my money, one of the ways in which the debate about same-sex marriage was won so quickly was when it ceased to be a debate about gay marriage, and it became a debate about marriage equality. Because it's very hard to persuade Americans to be against something that's equality. My view is that on this issue, at least, the senator is probably in the wrong place, historically, empirically, and philosophically, in terms of where trends are going to go, because that value of equality has been very strong. And I think it applies to gender roles. I think kind of egalitarian gender roles in marriage, and the change in the role of women is a huge part of it. And I think changing views about sexuality are part of it as well. And I find that the people who I know who are gay and have got married are very often some of the most socially conservative people I hang out with. They are very conservative about parenting, about their relationships, about fidelity, and so on. And so they seem to be expressing these incredibly strong conservative values through the institution of marriage. And so it seems to me odd that conservatives would kind of end up being against that. And I think it's probably something that would be good to get other people's views on. I think empirically that's the way the direction's going to go anyway, whether people like it or not. I think that is the future. And I tell you why I think that's really the case. The people in America who are most likely to get and stay married now are people like us, college graduates. In 2007, there was an important inflection point. That was the first year when college graduates were more likely to be married at the age of 30 than non-college graduates were. There is a marriage divide in this country. The people who are getting, staying married, committing, working hard at it, are college graduates. And guess what? They also have very liberal views on other things, including same-sex marriage, right? They have very, very egalitarian views about gender roles and the roles of men and women. As we go forward. So the very people who are keeping marriage alive in America are the ones who hold the most liberal views about things like same-sex marriage and gender roles. And so it just seems to me that if we have any hope of bringing about the values we all want, which include equality as well as commitment, then it's time to get on the other side of that argument. And I'll be fascinated to see, particularly how those on the Republican side of the aisle deal with this issue over the next 4 or 5 years. As I said, I thought his tone on it was perfect. Last point, I don't think you can really get away with saying that it's intolerant to be, that he says you're accused of being intolerant because he's in favor of traditional marriage. And if anyone does that, then clearly they should be called out for it. But he's doing something slightly different, right? It is one thing to say, I prefer A over B. I prefer traditional marriage, which we should just lose that prefix altogether, by the way, and nuclear. Not helping. I'm in favor of A, not B. Therefore, I think it's legitimate for states to prohibit B. That's not the same thing. He is perfectly at liberty to prefer one form of marriage over another. That does not give him the right to legally prevent the form of the institution that he doesn't like, because that's a completely different thing. So I thought, although he did it beautifully and elegantly and in all the right language, and his tone was fantastic, you can't really get away with that in the long run. And I think in any case, the tide of history is going so strongly against him that I have no doubt that whoever is running for the GOP nomination in 2020 will be in favor of same-sex marriage.